War has been a part of human history for a very long time, but each time it happens, it leaves behind a trail of pain and destruction that changes lives forever. Today, we're going to talk about how war impacts not just soldiers, but everyone, from children to entire countries. And we'll look at some real-life examples from the past and present to understand how deeply war affects human life. Let's begin by talking about the wars we've all heard about, like World War II, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. It lasted from 1939 to 1945, and millions of people died. This war involved many countries around the world, and the consequences were devastating. Families were torn apart, cities were destroyed, and people had to flee their homes to survive. One of the most tragic events was the Holocaust, where millions of innocent people, especially Jewish people, were killed in concentration camps. This war changed the world forever, and even today, we remember those who suffered and died because of it. But wars like World War II weren't just about soldiers fighting. They were about the people who were left behind. Imagine having to leave your home because bombs are falling from the sky. During the London Blitz, the city of London was bombed by German planes. Families would hide in underground shelters, not knowing if their homes would still be standing when they came out. Children had to be evacuated to the countryside, separated from their parents. This kind of fear and loss is something that many families in different parts of the world still experience today. Fast forward to more recent times, and we have conflicts like the war in Syria, which began in 2011. It started because people were unhappy with the government and wanted change. But what began as protests quickly turned into a full-scale war. Over the years, cities like Aleppo have been destroyed, and millions of people have had to leave their homes. The Syrian war has created one of the largest refugee crises in the world. Families have fled to countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and even all the way to Europe, hoping to find safety. Children who were born during this war have known nothing but conflict. They've never seen a day without the sound of gunfire or bombs. Then there's the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started in 2022. This war shocked the world because it happened so suddenly. Russia invaded Ukraine, and people who lived peaceful lives had to hide in basements or flee their country overnight. Cities like Kyiv and Mariupol were bombed, and innocent people, mothers, children, the elderly, had to leave everything behind. The reason for this war was complex, involving political disagreements and issues of territory. But what we saw was people suffering, ordinary people just like you and me, whose lives were turned upside down because of the fighting. And war doesn't just affect people's bodies, it affects their minds. Take Afghanistan, where decades of conflict have created a generation of people who have known nothing but war. Soldiers who fought in the Afghan war often come back with deep emotional scars. Many of them experience PTSD, which is when the things they saw and experienced during the war haunt them. Even when they're no longer fighting, they can't sleep, they feel anxious all the time, and sometimes they can't talk about what they've been through. But it's not just soldiers. Children in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other war-torn places also suffer from this trauma. Some children can't even play because they've grown up surrounded by fear and violence. We can also look at the Iraq War, which started in 2003 when the United States invaded Iraq. The reasons for this war were tied to political disagreements and the belief that Iraq had dangerous weapons. But after years of fighting, many parts of Iraq were left in ruins. Cities like Baghdad were hit hard, and even though the war officially ended, the effects are still felt today. Families lost their homes, their schools, and their sense of safety. Many children in Iraq don't remember a time before the war. Let's not forget about wars from further back in history, like the Vietnam War, which ended in 1975. This war was fought between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, with other countries like the United States getting involved. Millions of people died, and the country was left deeply scarred. Even after the war, things didn't go back to normal. Agent Orange, a chemical used during the war, caused long-term health problems for people living in Vietnam, affecting not only those who were there at the time, but also future generations. And then there are places where war is ongoing but less talked about, like Yemen. Since 2014, A war has been happening in Yemen that has caused one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. Millions of people don't have enough food, and many children are starving. The war started because different groups were fighting for power, but the real victims are the ordinary people. Imagine living in a place where you don't know if you'll have food tomorrow or if your house will be safe. Another place impacted by war is Sudan, where violence has erupted again in 2023. In Sudan, different groups are fighting for control, and the result is that people are once again being forced from their homes. The fighting has caused shortages of food, water, and medicine, making it difficult for families to survive. The conflict in Sudan is complex, but what's clear is that the people suffering the most are innocent civilians. War doesn't just destroy buildings, it destroys entire ways of life. In Iraq, the ancient city of Mosul was almost completely wiped out by war. This city had stood for centuries with a rich history and culture, but much of that was lost when fighting broke out. War erases not just the present, but also the past. But even in times of war, there are people who step up to help. Humanitarian workers travel to war zones to bring food, water, and medicine to those in need. In places like South Sudan, where there's been conflict for years, these workers provide hope for people who have lost everything. They help rebuild homes, schools, and hospitals, making sure that children can still learn and families can stay healthy. And while war is devastating, there are also stories of recovery. In Rwanda, a terrible genocide happened in 1994, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed. But after the fighting stopped, the people of Rwanda worked hard to rebuild their country. Today, Rwanda is a peaceful place, showing that even after the darkest times, healing is possible. War affects everyone, whether they're on the battlefield or not. It touches the lives of children, parents, and grandparents. It destroys homes, schools, and entire communities. But in every war-torn country, there are also stories of hope, courage, and the determination to rebuild. So as we hear these stories of war, we should remember how important it is to work for peace. Let's share these stories and remind ourselves that we can all do something to help. By understanding the pain that war causes, we can work together to create a world where no one has to suffer from it again. If you believe in the power of peace, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can spread the message that war is never the answer, and that peace is the path forward for all of us. But while we've shared stories of war's devastation, we must also remember the resilience of the human spirit. Through all the loss and hardship, people have shown incredible strength and hope. In the midst of destruction, we see communities coming together, helping each other rebuild. Children, even those who have seen the worst of war, find ways to smile, play, and dream. It's this hope that reminds us of something very important. War may bring suffering, but the human heart is capable of great love and healing. Let's look at a place like Bosnia, where a brutal war occurred in the 1990s. Entire cities were torn apart by violence and families were divided. The war was so intense that people thought they would never recover. But today, Bosnia has rebuilt itself. People who were once enemies now live as neighbors, working side by side to make sure their children grow up in a peaceful place. It wasn't easy, and it took time, but it shows us that even after the worst moments, there is always hope. Another powerful example is Japan, which experienced unimaginable destruction during World War II. Cities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by atomic bombs. The loss of life was enormous, and for years, the people of Japan struggled to rebuild. But today, Hiroshima stands as a symbol of peace. The people of Japan have turned their pain into a message for the world, that no one should have to endure such suffering again, and that peace must be the goal for every country. In these stories of war and recovery, we see one thing clearly. The desire for peace is universal. People from all parts of the world, whether in Syria, Japan, or Bosnia, share the same wish for a life without fear, without loss, and without war. They want to live in a world where children can go to school, where families can stay together, and where no one has to flee their homes. And this brings us to a crucial point. While we cannot change the past, we can shape the future. We can learn from these stories and work to make sure that future generations don't have to experience the horrors of war. It's up to all of us, no matter how old we are, to spread the message of peace, whether through conversations with our friends, helping others in need, or even by simply being kind and understanding. We can all play a part in making the world a better place. As we've seen from the examples of World War II, Syria, Ukraine, and others, the impact of war is far-reaching. It affects not only the people directly involved, but also the generations that follow. But by sharing these stories, by remembering the pain, and by celebrating the strength and resilience of those who rebuild, we keep the flame of hope alive. We remind ourselves that peace is not just a dream, it's something we can all work toward together. So, as we conclude this journey through the stories of war and its impact, let's carry forward the lessons we've learned. Let's strive to be better, to create a world where no one has to endure the suffering that war brings. And let's remember, no matter where we come from, that peace is the most precious gift we can give to ourselves and to future generations. Thank you for joining us on this important journey. If this message of hope and peace resonates with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue to spread the message that love, understanding, and peace will always be stronger than war. Let's make sure that the next chapter in human history is one of unity, compassion, and lasting peace.